Hey, you crazy cats and kittens. It's Jeff with Third Shift Brewing here today, making our first sour beer. It's going to be batch number 84. It's a hazy sour IPA. Got this information from Barley and Hops TV. Been doing a ton of research to figure out all the steps needed to make our first sour beer. So I'll take you a little bit through the process so you at home can see how we're doing this. This beer, in terms of the grain bill, we use 50% wheat, 50% two-row, and a little bit of flake oats, and put that into our mash tun. Stir it up with some water, and you can see here in the mash tun what that looks like. So all the grains are steeping, and we're extracting those sugars and other starches and proteins that we will be using to make our beer. So the thing about your mash, it's very important to hit your target pH, because the breakdown of those sugars takes place when you hit the right pH level. Normal pH for water is 7.0. We were shooting for between 5.5 and 5.7 on this mash, and you can see right here we're at 5.6. Lowering that pH is going to allow us to add an extra step in the sour beer process. This is the critical phase. So in order for the beer to go from being a clean beer to a sour beer, we need to dramatically drop the pH. We're going to do that by adding some lactic acid. Once we have that lactic acid and down to a pH level that we're happy with, which is the target is 4.4, we're going to go ahead and add a handful of unmilled grains. And from those unmilled grains, we're going to put that into these two carboys, fill them with beer, let them sit at 110 degrees for 48 hours, and that will create natural bacteria, lactobacillus bacteria, which will help further sour the beer. It's this extra hold step of 48 hours that actually makes this a sour beer. So never done it before. A couple different ways you can create that sourness. The way we're gonna use the grains, you can also add a probiotic. You can also add yogurt. So I looked into the different steps, and this seems to be the most appropriate, and we'll come back with those next steps right after this. All right, so we are finished with our mash. The water from the mash tun that has been steeping with those grains for 60 minutes is now being transferred into a temporary holding vessel. We are then going to take this water from this tank right here and rinse those grains to get any remaining sugars, dextrins, and other starches and proteins we want to get into our final beer. So once we get ready to sparge, that's the next step. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. So we just put 6 gallons of water and our brewing salts into our grains. And from here, we'll let it steep for 10 minutes. We'll run this water through, and we will have all of the beer collected that we need, the wort we need to go ahead and sour. And we're back. All right, so we are sparging. Sparging means we are taking the grains left over from the mash and rinsing them with water to get the remaining starch and sugars and dextrins out of there, so that we can compile all of that into our wort. The wort is what we actually make the beer out of. So we're going to do a quick pH check once we get all of the wort collected, and then we will make some pH adjustments, and we'll be back in a minute. So we have collected all of our wort. We took a reading to see how dense the wort is. We're a little bit under where we wanted to be. In terms of the potential for alcohol to be converted from the sugars, but we should be able to adjust for that during our boil 2 days from now. We took a pH reading of this wort. The whole point is to drive that pH down so that we can throw those grains on that, and then we can get that lactobacillus naturally occurring to further sour the beer. Reading is 5.67. We will need to get down to 4.4. In order to do that, we will add lactic acid. We'll add some lactic acid, get it adjusted, and be right back. So, wow, had to add a ton of lactic acid to drive that pH from down to 4.5. We're at 4.44. It took 14 milliliters of lactic acid going into the wort. So almost at the end of this process, part of the souring process, what we need to do is get this up to 170 degrees for about 5 minutes. That'll pasteurize it. We should be set. And then we'll be putting it into our fermentation vessels, into our chamber, and then waiting 48 hours. We are back. So had a little bit of a bump in the road here. I pasteurized the wort because barley and hops told me to. I did that. It took forever to chill the wort back down. But now we're getting ready for the final phase, which is to get the wort into our temporary fermenters, adding our grains, and then we'll get that natural lactobacillus off the husks of those grains. We're going to hold for 48 hours, and we'll come back and then start our typical brew routine. Going to first gas this to get rid of any oxygen. The CO2, we're purging the oxygen with CO2. Apparently there's a chance of wild yeast getting in here, so putting the CO2 in provides less of an environment where that bacteria can grow, those bacteria and wild yeast that we don't want in the beer. So we're gassing it real fast, purging it with CO2, and then we are going to fill this all the way to the top, or as close to the top as we can. And then we will add our unmilled grains and let nature take over. Once we get this thing filled, we're going to put it in our fermentation chamber, which I have set at 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and that should give us the conditions in order to get that natural lactobacillus. So we're going to add those grains. For 0.9 ounces per gallon, or a handful, so I guess that's a handful. And then we will gas. Brewer's assistant, can you hand me that airlock? Once again, purging to make sure that we are completely void of oxygen. You see the CO2 coming out, or at least I think it can. And then we'll put this in our fermenter at 110 degrees, and we'll be back in 48 hours.